Morning, everyone. Welcome to the BC Wine Grape Council R&D Committee's May 3rd Thursday presentation. Thanks for coming. Before we get started, I just want to remind you that coming up, we have two Vineyard Field Day presentations on June 9th and 10th. One in the north and one in the south Okanagan. So if you're interested in going to those, please go onto the website and register, or find Kate's latest email and register for that. And I'll try to remind you at the end too. But and then next month that we won't have a third Thursday live presentation because the R&D committee is having an in-person meeting with researchers. So the next presentation will be in July. So yeah, we have two presenters today on invasive species. First, we have Nick Wong. Nick has a background in marine ecology and is the manager of science and operations at the Invasive Species Council of BC, where he leads a team delivering science-based programs and projects. He oversees major provincial initiatives, including invasive species surveillance and BC's Japanese beetle eradication program. And he led the development of the 2024 to 28 invasive species strategy. Well, welcome, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Thanks very much, everyone. I will just start my screen share here.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Yeah, I know. I was just wondering. So then.
All right.
Oh.
Yes. Okay, well, thanks for the very, very warm welcome. Appreciate you having me today. I would just first, really like to acknowledge that I'm grateful to be here presenting to all of you from the ancestral unceded territory of the Kwai-Kwitlam First Nation. They're otherwise known as Coquitlam. So I'm with the Invasive Species Council of BC, and we're a provincial invasive species charity. We primarily focus on sort of education and outreach, some training and collaboration across Canada and sort of internationally. And we're a founding member and co-chair of the Canada Invasives, which is the sort of the national voice for invasives in Canada. We're 20 years old as an organization, and basically I don't think our vision has changed too much over the years, but it's for healthy landscapes and communities free of invasive species. And our mission is essentially to take action to build healthy landscapes, habitats, and communities through education and responsible practices to prevent the introduction and the spread. We're guided by a really diverse board of directors with representation from all levels of government, including First Nations governments, other NGOs, industry, the things like recreation and tourism, regional committees, and some sort of other environmental type groups. And kind of who do we work with? Well, we work and partner and collaborate with many, but it includes sort of, again, all levels of government, federal, local, and provincial governments, First Nations, stewardship groups and organizations, as well as sort of regional or local invasive species organizations. So there's quite a range of groups, organizations doing excellent work across the province, including Lisa and Oasis, who you're going to hear from shortly. But there is kind of pretty good coverage of local on the ground work happening through these types of work. So I'm going to show you next quite a busy map, but just to give you a sense of who and sort of some of the players and who's doing what, and just to note that there are a couple of I would say not necessarily gaps, but places where there aren't necessarily a direct regional invasive species organization. That doesn't mean there isn't good work happening. There's contractors and other folks and maybe regional districts or others doing invasive species work. Um, but there are a couple where yeah, that isn't quite the case. So up in Fort Nelson, then again in the Northern Rockies municipality, and then in the North Okanagan and Central Okanagan regional districts. So with respect to some of these invasive species organizations, and again, Lisa will chat a bit about what they do in with Oasis, but some of these organizations just focus on plants, some do a bit of both, some focus more on education, and some focus on operations, and some do combinations of all of these things. Um, and we try to support organizations doing invasive species work and try to partner with these regional organizations in the delivery of certain things and work across the province. So that's just a little bit of an overview on us and sort of how some of the invasive species work is going. But the reason I suppose I am here is to talk about some of the more recent work that we got to do last year through some funding through the Investment Agriculture Foundation. And that was an agriculture project working with the forage. So we had two streams. We had the forage side, and then we kind of had fruits and berries and vineyards. So I'm just going to stop screen sharing my PowerPoint, and I'm going to take you to our web page where a lot of this stuff is all hosted. I will also pop some links in the chat after, just to where to find some of these things, information as well about uh, an interactive map showing all these regional invasive species partners and contacts for wherever you are. All right, bear with me here. Sorry. So like I said, we worked with the IAF to create a rather interesting project. So with everything, sort of a lot of the projects that we do, we bring together sort of subject matter experts to help guide the projects. Um, Promote them out there as well. And so we had quite a good group for this project, representation from the BC fruit growers. We had some grape growers themselves, Ministry of Agriculture. We had Blueberry Council and other folks like that. So our aim was to create some practical tools to help identify invasive species, um, best practices, and sort of resources. So the website is kind of broken into two sides, the forage and rangeland and then the fruits, berries, and vineyards. So I'll for now just skip past the forage and rangeland resources. But for yourselves, so we ended up holding a workshop in Penticton, a full day workshop back last year, and we recorded that whole thing. So you can find that through this webpage. Again, I'll put the link in the chat, but that's hosted on our YouTube. We also had two webinars with two invasive species insect experts from the Ministry of Agriculture. So we had a webinar with Susan Achampong talking about some insect pests in orchards and vineyards, as well as a presentation with Tracy Heppelizer, the Director of Plant Health at Ministry of Agriculture and Food, and talking about some of the emerging pests and some more novel approaches to monitoring and surveillance, as well as some of the responses to these new emerging things. So these webinar recordings and the workshop itself is found through our YouTube. So these links will take you right there. We also created an e-learning course. So there's a free e-learning course. It's self-paced. and designed to support orchardists and berry growers and vineyard operators. It's pretty straightforward. Probably takes about 2 hours to work your way through. It also talks about the reporting process and how to ID and report invasive species. And throughout the course, there's sort of knowledge checks and a final quiz to sort of reinforce what's been learned. So, yeah, these couple of things should hopefully be helpful in terms of professional development and sort of keeping up with what's happening on invasives in the space. Uh, in addition to that, so we made a short micro video learning series, so focusing on um, different aspects of the production cycle. So yeah, from pre-season preparation through bud break and early growth, through to active growth and maintenance, the harvest season, and then post-harvest and winterizing. So we have 5 videos in that series that are good to check out as well. And then another interesting thing that we made is we have a variety of different identification field guides for invasive pests. And so, yeah, we have this field guide to agricultural pests and other invasives in BC. So it's a pretty lengthy document. I'll just give you an example. So yeah, quite a swath of invasive plants, some of the priority insects, and some of the diseases and pathogens. And it gives you ID tips. Primarily ID tips. Talks a little bit about methods of spread, and then also, sorry. And why aren't you scrolling? Okay, there we go. And then information on reporting as well. And then finally, we did a bit of a scan through what's already available, some additional resources from partner organizations, and there's a supplementary document that you can download it and has hyperlinks to all of these sort of useful resources to share. Yeah, so without scrolling through each little bit, that's kind of all I've got for today. So I've just put in the chat the link to that web page, which houses all of the resources I just went through. The second is links to our web page with the interactive map, which shows all the contacts for the different local or regional invasive species organizations. And then if you have any questions about invasives or the content, you're more than welcome to reach out to me at nwong at BC Invasives and can hopefully get some information in your hands.
Thanks, Nick. That is a lot of information.
Yeah,
Yeah, didn't really know that was available. Kate will Kate will post she's already posted the main link in the chat, and we'll have that information on the website as well.
great.
Thanks, Nick.
Great.
Next we have Lisa Scott. Lisa was born and raised in the Okanagan Valley. She's a professional biologist and has worked as a consultant in the fields of invasive species management, environmental assessments, and conservation planning for 30 years. She's a strong proponent of holistic management and community-based conservation. She's been the executive director of the Okanagan and Similkameen Invasive Species Society, which we call OASIS, since its inception in 1996. Welcome, Lisa.
Great. Thanks very much for the introduction, Kathy. Whoops. Let me start over. Got to get the right screen. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks, Nick, for that great kind of provincial level overview and sharing all the excellent resources that have been developed. It'll tie in nicely to what I'm sharing at a local level based on my experience over the last 30 years in working really closely with Okanagan as well as Similkameen vineyards and the issues that invasive species pose to the growers and the management of invasive species there. So very brief background on our organization if you've never heard of us before. So we are one of the regional groups that Nick referred to. So in any given year, we have over 20 funding partners and probably 50 to 60 other partners that we join forces with. The emphasis of our organization is on invasive plants, although we are an invasive species society. Some of the local folks here may be familiar with the work we do with the Okanagan Basin Water Board. We address aquatic invasive species, and we're the face of the Don't Move a Mussel campaign in the Okanagan Similkameen. When we also help where we can, work closely with partners like Ministry of Agriculture, with emerging species such as insect pests. And so I will be touching on that a bit today. So maybe taking a step back here is just that question, so we're all on the same page, is what are invasive species? So we are talking about invasive plants, animals, pathogens that are not native to British Columbia. They may be from North America, perhaps Eastern North America, such as the American bullfrog in this picture. But many species are actually from overseas, from Europe, from Asia, Africa. They've been brought to British Columbia without their natural predators or pathogens that would keep them in check in their native homeland. So this gives them that competitive advantage and allows them to establish aggressively, in the case of plants, outcompete our native plants, outcompete our crops or culturally important plants, and essentially move in and take over. When we talk to kids, we talk about them being bullies for a good comparison. So by nature of what they do, this causes detrimental impacts to society and humans, as well as the local environment, as well as economic impacts. So there have been several studies and reports published by the Intergovernmental Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And just a couple of quotes here. One is from their 2019 study where they identified invasive species as one of the 5 most important direct drivers of biodiversity loss. And then more recently in 2023, they issued a special report stating that invasive species have played a key role in 60% of global plant and animal extinctions. And we know that this is only going to be exacerbated by climate change. So what does this have to do with vineyards? Well, vineyards are not just a place where grapes are grown. They're ecosystems teeming with life, everything from soil microorganisms to birds and insects. So biodiversity plays a critical role in maintaining healthy vineyards and producing high quality wine. So very concerning when we see this information. And so that's where organizations like ISCBC come in, doing work at, across the province, and then regional groups like ours, helping to work with growers and communities at a local level. So specific to invasive plants, what are the impacts? So obviously we're going to have increased costs because when invasive plants move in, we need to take action to move them out. So this is going to impact the pocketbook of growers. The impact of the grapes themselves, especially young vines, it's competition So it can potentially weaken the grapevines and impact productivity and your yield. Of course, when you get monocultures or basically wall-to-wall single species of these unwanted invaders, it can prove really challenging to control. This means time means money, and then so it impacts the pocketbook significantly. And then if not managed, it can get spread from property to property as machinery is moved, as visitors go from site to site, or contractors. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time just touching on a couple key species that are problematic in Okanagan and Similkameen vineyards. So number one, and just no surprise, is Puncturevine. My 30-year career, this has been prominent throughout. And we work with so many partners to try and get a handle on this invasive plant, but it's been challenging to say the least, and it continues to spread in British Columbia. It's now shown up in multiple locations in Kamloops, unfortunately. But in Canada, BC's interior is the only place where this plant grows. It just thrives in our very hot, dry climate. In fact, it's a summer annual, and annuals in general are not invasive species that we typically are concerned about. But my first few slides are about a couple annual plants, and this is a summer annual. So it typically doesn't start growing until around about now with warming soil temperatures. It needs about 22 to 23 degrees soil temperatures to start growing. So not surprisingly, we first start seeing it in the Osoyoos area as young plants, and then soon up the valley. And we know it grows all the way up into north of Vernon in the Okanagan, and it's also in the Similkameen Valley, but not as far west as Princeton, but it is prominent in the Karameas-Costin area. So as I mentioned, summer annual, but a very shallow taproot, so it can be easily hand pulled. The stems can be massive. They can grow in all directions up to 10 feet, almost growing out like an octopus, but typically mat forming. We don't usually see it growing upright. So it forms these very dense mats, seemingly fairly inconspicuous, just greenery on the ground. But if you were to lift up those stems and look underneath, you would see these very spiny seed pods. And they form after you see the little tiny yellow flowers. So unfortunately, most people recognize it when the plants are mature. It's middle of the summer, and the seed pods have formed. And at that time, if you were considering herbicide application, it is unfortunately too late. These plants do die at the first frost, but of course they leave those tack-like seed pods behind, and then the seeds, they're tiny and they're housed inside those seed pods. So the damage is already done, unfortunately. So the other hitchhiker, if you will, is long-spined sandbur. And when I first started, everybody was talking about Puncturevine, and we soon discovered this grass. So it's an upright grass, but when it gets mature, it can kind of tip over and grow sideways as well. But it is also a hitchhiker. It wasn't very prolific 30 years ago, but boy, has it spread. And like Puncturevine, I would say pretty much every vineyard south of Okanagan Falls has some level of infestation of at least one or both of these species, which is very unfortunate. So in this case, the seed pods are round and spiky. With the Puncturevine, the seed pods break apart into segments, and that's when the tack-like structures form. But with this, they're just spiky all over. They're about the size of a pea. And they will attach to anything and everything, and they're actually quite painful if they get in your hands. The leaf sheaths are loose and they're flattened. It can be challenging to identify before it produces the main stem that has the spiky seeds on. But we've got information to help you with identification, because as I'll mention several times, that is really key, is knowing what's growing in your vineyard, knowing what is problematic, and then you can work on how to address it. So in addition to these two hitchhiker spiky summer annuals, we do have a few other species that are of concern. I'm just going to highlight a few here. Baby's breath is one that I've helped provide some support in local vineyards. In this case, it's a perennial. It's very bushy. It has branched stems, and it fits in that category of what we call tumbleweeds, which is actually a nickname for species like Russian thistle and diffuse knapweed. What it essentially means is, just like the first two species, it's very good at spreading its seeds. How it does that is at maturity, it breaks at the base and tumbles in the wind. And one plant can produce up to 10,000 seeds in a growing season. So typically, and I've grown up here, but I feel like the winds are getting worse and worse every year. We have very few still days. And so that provides an opportunity for these plants to, in the summertime, once they're mature, they're filled with seeds, and they break at the base, and they tumble, and they land right up against fences. And sometimes they'll blow right over fences. And so often where we see the problem is around the perimeter of the vineyards along the fence lines. It certainly can be challenging to control, doesn't have a lot of leaf area if you're using herbicides, and if you dig it out, it's got like a really thick parsnip sized root. So you got to dig out that whole root. And then the vines. I definitely see a lot of different vines. Of course, Puncturevine is a vine itself, but other vines here like vetch and madwort and bindweed, all of these species, all of these invasive vines can move into your vineyard and be really challenging to control. I'm not going to spend much time going into the specifics of each of these species, because this is just a short list, really just a small amount of information to get you thinking about what might be in your vineyard. And then I'll go through the steps, like now what? Now that I know what I've got, what can I do about it? Before we get to that, though, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about invasive trees. So there are 4 species that we are concerned about in the Okanagan Similkameen region. They're all here from left to right: Siberian elm, Russian olive, tree of heaven, and black locust. So from a land management perspective, all 4 of these have problems. They're the biggest weeds on the landscape. And they're challenging to control. They're costly to control. If you don't have them, do what you can to keep them out. And if you have small outbreaks, get on top of them quickly. And really, that recommendation bodes well for all invasive plants, but especially the trees. We've got lots of information on our website on these species, but I do want to focus right now just on one species, that being tree of heaven, because it has the greatest potential to impact vineyards, because it's a host plant for a few different insect pests. So the first insect pest is the brown marmorated stinkbug. So this is a shield-shaped stink bug, as you can see in the slide. And sorry, my credit didn't show up there, but that stink bug photo is courtesy of the Ministry of Agriculture. So it first showed up in Pennsylvania in 2001 and has since spread throughout most of the United States, and came across from Asia. They think it was in wooden shipping crates. I mean, just an incredibly good hitchhiker, moves with wood, cargo, rail system, vehicles, And not surprisingly, it eventually made its way across to the West Coast and arrived in British Columbia in 2015, I believe, and it was found in the Kelowna area. The big concern with this particular insect pest is that it feeds on over 100 different plant species. And one of its favorites is tree of heaven. So very close association with this invasive tree. So now you have two invasives that are connected to each other. Unfortunately, one of its other favorite hosts is grapes. And so when this arrived over 10 years ago in the Okanagan Valley, there was a lot of concern that we were going to see some significant impacts and damage to our agricultural sector. The stink bug also feeds on apples, is another preferred species, as well as pears and cherries, ground crops like peppers and tomatoes, and the list goes on. Now, a lot of studies have been done to monitor where the stink bug moved to. And fortunately, while it did move around quite a bit and is in most locations in the Okanagan and Similkameen, it never did explode like we feared. And it has shown up in some agricultural areas, but no obvious damage to any of the fruits yet. So fingers crossed. It also does occur in the Fraser Valley and other areas of BC, and it's quite prominent there. But so one to watch for. There are some similar looking native stink bugs. So what you look for is the white striping on the antenna. So get your whatever you need out to have a close-up look at the antenna. If you suspect you found one in your vineyard or nearby, certainly collect it up, take some good photos, and you could reach out to Oasis to confirm ID. But otherwise, we're not looking for reports. We do know it's widespread. What we hope doesn't arrive, but unfortunately looks like it's on its way, is this insect pest called the spotted lanternfly. It is native to China, India, Japan, and Vietnam, and it was first detected again in Pennsylvania in 2014, so only 12 years ago. It's a very unique and colorful insect. It looks like what you see in this slide in the late summer into the fall at an adult stage. But you see when its wings are opened, it's incredibly color and distinctive. And they do, the species congregates en masse. So, if it does show up, I would presume it would be quite noticeable. The species hasn't yet established well in Western United States, but it's showing up in California and Oregon. It did show up in 2024 in Ontario, but we're talking about one or two individuals, not an established infestation. So to date, the spotted lanternfly is not deemed to occur in Canada. So reporting, if you think you see this species, is imperative. And reporting can go to ourselves, or it can go to the Ministry of Agriculture or to CFIA, so at a federal level. So if you see something, speak up, because this is really important. We want to get on top of the species if or when it arrives. Now, what's the problem? Again, there is a close association, much closer than the stink bug, to tree of heaven. This is very much a preferred host plant for the spotted lanternfly. But of course, it also loves grapes as well. And in Pennsylvania, it's known to devastate grape crops up to 90%. So this is a huge impact. And so we want to do all we can to keep to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for a problem. So the more we can reduce the tree of heaven, the reduction is there for hopefully keeping spotted lanternfly out. There's also the elm seed bug. This is not an agricultural pest, but this particular bug is affiliated with our invasive Siberian elm trees. So again, if we didn't have the elm trees, we wouldn't have the elm seed bug. There's very few ornamental elms in our region. There's some American elm in the city of Penticton. So this is really problematic moving into homes and causing impacts there, more just the ick factor. So how to manage invasive plants. So we've touched on a few of these, but number one, identify what you're dealing with. And then where is it located in your vineyard? So you want to map the area out. Then you want to identify potential vectors of spread. This is really key. How is the invasive plant potentially going to move from one part of the vineyard to the other? And what are some vulnerable sites? And we'll talk about what that means in a bit. Once you've identified that, you've got your map. It's important to set priorities, goals, and objectives. So you have something to work towards, strive towards. Set a timeline for achieving those objectives. Develop a plan that looks at all the different tools available to you, whether it's manual control, reseeding as a cultural control. Potentially, it's a invasive plant that has natural insect enemies or biocontrol. So you could collaborate with a regional invasive group to get some insects available to help you out. Or if you're not organic and you're using chemical application. So looking at all the different tools and integrating them to come up with your best approach. And then you want to implement that plan. And lastly, you want to monitor. This is a pretty critical part. You want to see, is it working? Am I meeting my goals? If not, what's the problem? And then adapt. Take an adaptive management approach. Nick mentioned several hot off the press resources on the ICBC website. We've also got some great resources on our website at oasis.ca, but I really want to draw your attention to the website on the right-hand side. So Okanagan Invasive Species Online. If you're not familiar with it, please jot it down. Hopefully it's in the resources that ICBC's compiled, because this was created for the agricultural sector in the Okanagan Valley. It's a one-stop shop. We got funding through the Climate Action Initiative. And again, we worked closely with the agricultural sector. We had representatives and a group that helped with the design creation of this website. So it's got everything invasive on there, from birds to mammals to reptiles, very heavy to plants, insects, and so on. What's really cool is the different ways you can link in. So if you know the name of the plant, you've got Puncturevine, you can click and type in Puncturevine. Or you can go to where it says click here to find by commodity, go straight to grapes. I'm a grape grower. What should I be concerned about? And then we divide it up into the South, Central, and North Okanagan. And in part, this was to fill that gap where there are limited resources. There is no regional group like ours doing work in the Central and North Okanagan. We get a lot of phone calls, as do front desk staff in the Kelowna and Vernon areas. And so this is a great website to provide some insight for the entire valley, but certainly if you live outside the valley, it's useful as well. Now, we talked as well about vulnerable sites. These are photos from the South Okanagan. We really want to take a preventative approach by reducing soil disturbances and seeding soils that are bare, as otherwise these sites are incredibly vulnerable to opportunistic plants. You can already see at the edge of the rows there the Russian thistle that's established, and then in the foreground the long-spine sandbur and puncturevine is starting to establish. So the more we can reduce these areas of significant disturbance, the better. This is another vineyard I went to some years back. These periphery roads on the headlands, You might think, well, nothing's going to grow there. You might think that, but this is perfect growing medium for Puncturevine and long spine Sandbur. And then, of course, you can see there's footprints, there's animal tracks, there's vehicle track, there's equipment. And so if we have these invasive plants establishing in these areas, those pieces of equipment and people, wildlife, even the vineyard dogs, they are going to pick up those seeds inadvertently, and they're just going to get carried throughout the vineyard. And so the more we can reduce our soil disturbances, seed bare soils, and do that cover cropping that we're going to talk about in June at the field days. This is really, really important for prevention of invasives and reducing invasives. So we talked about identifying vectors and addressing pathways of spread. So I've talked about them. Here's some visuals. So vehicles caught underneath undercarriages of vehicles, caught in the tires of our equipment. So watch where you park. And that third photo, a very interesting story is, so somebody, there was bins of grapes were brought from an Oliver vineyard into the Summerland area at harvest. And when they put the bins down, they looked, and what did they find? They found those tack-like seed pods of Puncturevine actually stuck in the bins. So we need to think about placement of our equipment and supplies as well. We always want to be on this heightened alert to be aware of these potential vectors and pathways. So just wrapping up, we want to apply best management practices. Monitor your property regularly during the growing season. Watch for the species I've mentioned and many, many more. If anything looks unique, aim to identify it. Take some good photos and go to the OISO website or reach out to myself or, depending on where you live, your local regional group or ISCBC to get some support. Reduce that amount of bare ground, minimize soil disturbances, get some seed on the ground, get your cover crop in place, and develop clear protocols for cleaning your vehicles, your machinery, footwear. You could even establish checkpoints or cleaning stations. And if there's an area that's really prolific of Puncturevine, it's all gone to seed, you could even cordon off the area so nobody's parking there, things aren't getting placed there. And how can we help? OASIS can provide educational tools. We've got resources that I've just shown you on our 2 websites. We can help with invasive plant identification, provide support with management options. We can help you develop that plan. We can come to your vineyard. We can walk it with you. We can help provide some guidance as well. And all of that we are already covered. This is not at a cost to you. It's part of the service that we provide thanks to our many funders, in particular, the Regional District of Okanagan, Similkameen. We can provide links to other groups if we can't help, or other resources. And we can certainly support you in a community approach, because usually it's not just one vineyard. It would be an area of issue. Maybe there's a problem with an infestation that's moved in from the road that borders your vineyard. Maybe there's a power line that goes through. We can help make those linkages and help with the collaboration of everyone coming together for the best results. So lots of opportunity to help you out. So thanks for your time today. I was happy to present, and hoping, it looks like we've got some time for questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That was awesome. That was a really good presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mehdi's clapping his hands. Do you have a question or anything to add, Mehdi? I think you probably do when we talk about cover cropping. Hi, Mehdi.
Hi, thank you so much. In both presentations, very interesting. And I made some notes, and I'm going to definitely check the websites that you guys introduced. So one of my interests is that this year I'm gonna kind of monitor some of these top invasive species and see if the cover cropping practice in the vineyards has any impact. So maybe just even a simple counting of the plants within a certain area that gives me maybe at least some initial information of seeing the. But visually, I have noticed that in some of these sites, especially down south, we see some effect when we have the cover crops. We see less of these invasive species there, but definitely very interesting, very important topic. And I'm glad that the BC Wine Grape Council has some attention to this, and hopefully by everyone working together, we can kind of have the control or keep these invasive species contained and they don't spread all around the region. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mehdi. Are there any other questions? Just turn on your Seth. Is there a document that recommends sprays to target these different invasives? Which herbicide?
Yeah, good question. We do have one document specific to Puncturevine and long spine sandbur that's on both the OISO and the Oasis website. So if you go to Puncturevine, you should find a link to it. It's a best practices for those two species. That is the only one though and that was following some research that we did with Ken Sapsford, which many of you probably know before he had just arrived from the prairies and we grabbed him as a consultant before he decided to not be retired and work for the BC government for a few years. And now he's consulting again. So he loves his work, clearly. But I think more so, so he did some research trials for us because of the concerns with Puncturevine in the vineyard. So we got some funding to support that. And so that's probably the only thing that we provide. In general, I would just suggest that every situation is different. I rarely hesitate to provide advice without going to a site, looking at the particular situation, what you're dealing with. People call me and they say they've got knapweed and I show up and it's mustard. And so, it really is important as a professional that we see these sites and that advice is provided on a vineyard by vineyard, site by site basis. Having said that, there are individuals that could be reached out to when it gets into the specific herbicides and rates. It's starting to get outside of my area of expertise, and I think bringing in a specialist who understands the different herbicides that are available would be wise. And that's where we can help link you to those individuals. So that's my recommendation.
Thanks, Lisa. Other questions? Oh, Mehdi, in organic vineyards, which they cannot use herbicides, what alternatives exist?
Yeah, great question. And that was part of the work that we did with Ken and is in that document as well. So we look at, doing the best management practices that I've talked about. I mean, these species can all be manually controlled. They can be picked by hand. If you do it early in the season before you're dealing with spiny, spiky species or before that bindweed is like wrapped over your grapes, I mean, all the better. And then the preventative approach through the cover cropping as well. We did find in our trials that Puncturevine does not do well if you are able to put a cover of mulch on top. Needs to be about 3 inches thick. It suppressed in our plots, I think by about 85% of the Puncturevine got suppressed just by putting a layer of mulch over top. I get it, that's not practical, especially at the end of the rows where, the equipment turns around, all that mulch is going to go everywhere. So that's why it's those steps. What have you got? Where is it located? What are your objectives? Because doing some of these techniques might work well, and around the winery we'll do this, on the driveway we'll do that, at the headlands we'll do this, and they might all be different techniques. But there certainly are some options for the organic vineyards, but again, it would need to be a case by case basis to provide that best advice.
And if you pull it, how do you dispose of it?
Good question. Thanks for asking that, because disposal is just as important as the removal. So generally, we do encourage everything to be taken to the landfill and put on the active face. All of our landfills dispose in the Okanagan Similkameen. Disposal of invasive plants, the tipping fees waived. So you should bag things up or put them in the back of a truck with a canopy, or tarp it in your trailer and get it to the landfill and say, I have invasive plants, and they will guide you where to put it so that it doesn't go on the active face. Other locations, they haven't waived the tipping fee. And so it's just really important, depending where you live, to find out what the rules, regulations, recommendations are. But the main message is we do want to keep invasives out of our yard waste. We do want to keep it out of the compost, because there are some species that will do well in like commercial composts at the landfill, but others, they've got hard little seeds, and they withstand the composting process, and then the compost gets recirculated, and the problem just gets perpetuated. So again, knowing what you have, knowing where you live, and just doing those inquiries. And again, that's where people like myself and Nick can provide some guidance.
So if you're just pulling weeds at home and you have an invasive species, should you put that into your household garbage? Like bag it up and put it into your garbage, not your yard waste? Oh,
That's what we recommend, yes.
that's good to know. Any other questions? Could either of you speak about the relationship between climate change and invasive species?
Sure. I've been doing all the talking. I can pass it over to Nick if he
Nick?
wants to take it, but I'm happy to as well.
But you can both chime in. Nick?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely something we need to think about when we're uh yeah, thinking about longer term. Inevitably, climate change will create sort of conditions conducive to new invasions, but it's also going to allow invasives to expand their ranges as well. So yeah, without any concrete examples, perhaps Lisa, you could any of those from your region, but yeah, definitely a concern. It's one of those five drivers together that Lisa mentioned before, so they just exacerbate each other, unfortunately.
Yeah, well said. I mean, there's going to be a lot of invasive winners. It might not bode well for some species, but generally invasives are going to do well in the face of climate change, and already are doing well. We've got the longer growing days, the longer growing season, so you get a drought tolerant species, certainly in the South Okanagan, like the Puncturevine, like the Sandbur. They don't need rain. They just grow. They thrive in those. They've got adaptations to do very well. Toad flax is another example of an invasive plant that may be on the periphery of your vineyards. I know we worked with Tinhorn Winery years ago to put biocontrol agents around the vineyard, and that did a really good job at suppressing those outbreaks. But those plants have this waxy layer protecting their leaves from drought-like conditions. And so they're like, great, more sunny days, longer growing season, they're just going to do very well in the face of climate change. and expand their ranges, as Nick mentioned. So I think we just need to be prepared for the inevitable. And the more we can create resilient systems, we talk about resilient ecosystems in our natural ecosystems, but the same can hold true for our managed systems like our vineyards, you know. And that's, again, I'll come back the cover cropping and just you know, we want to have healthy soils. We want to have a healthy setting in our environment. If you can create that buffer around the vineyard and maintain some of the natural ecosystems, I mean, that's going to bode well for the overall health of the vineyard also.
Thank you. I'll also shout out to Mehdi, who is has been working on cover crops and cover crop recommendations, and he's developed a decision-making tool which will be available soon or is available now, Mehdi?
There's some kind of shorter version of that, like questionnaire and some flow chart and so on, which I prepared in terms of in shape of the fact sheet and so on. They're available, but I'm working with a team of IT experts and website developers on creating a web-based tool, more sophisticated. And we're hoping by the end of this year, we have something that we can test run it, and then the grower can use it and give us feedback, and then we improve it next year.
Awesome. Thank you. So a reminder, we have the field days in the North and South Okanagan on June 9th and 10th, and there will be discussions about invasive species at those meetings. So the North is June 9th and the South is June 10th. Kate has put links in the chat to register. And if you miss that, then go to the website and the BC Wine Grape Council website, and you'll be able to register for that. And Kate is going to share that information. There we go. Thanks, Kate. And thanks again to our speakers, Lisa and Nick. I feel like we could probably do some follow-up sessions on this because it's a ton of information and it's really important and interesting. So thanks for joining us. Again, our June 18th third Thursday is deferred. And we'll see you in July. And again, thanks for joining us and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.